All right, students, the next part of Chapter 9 deals with really how the government is set up. I'm going to break this into two parts as well because some of it it's a little bit intricate, so I'm going to take a little bit more time on it. So obviously the framers thought that the legislative branch was the most important, and the legislative branch is made up of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. At the present time, our House of Representatives has 435 voting representatives. But that could change because it's based on what? Well, it's based on our population. And every 10 years, we have something called a census where they count all the people. And when they do that, things change. And so if our population changes very much, then the amount of representatives will change. So it could change the next time we have a census. There are also some non-voting delegates. In other words, these people get to be there in the House and they get to see what's going on and report back to their people. But these people are from places that don't really, they're not a state, and so they can't vote. And that's District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, Virgin Islands, and Northern Mariana Islands. All right, this little map is a map showing you all of the House of Representative districts. So you can see that if there's more population, like if you look in the south part of Texas, like where Houston kind of is, let me see if I can make the cursor go over here, like right here is where Houston is. You see they're all kind of crunched up together. Or like up here in the northeast, where there's a lot of population, you will see that they're more crunched up together. That means that there's more population, so there's more representatives. In places like Montana, look, they don't have as many because there's not as many people. That's how it works. Okay, and the next map is, this is the very last, and I'm making this screencast, it's actually about 2 weeks out from the presidential election, so it's before the presidential election. And this was the 2012 presidential election. I think it's interesting. You can see on this map almost where the cities are, because the cities almost all voted Democrat. That's the blue. Not all, because here's Alaska. Obviously, they voted Democrat. And the red is Republican. And in the countryside, out in the country, they voted Republican. But where are all the people living? They're all, most of the population is living in the cities. So in the Northeast, in the cities areas, they voted heavily Democrat. Also along the Mississippi River here, they voted Democrat. Down here in Houston, here's the city of Houston, Democrat. Okay, but here's the outlying counties around it, Republican. All right. So you can see a pattern, and I think it's kind of interesting. And as soon as we get a pattern from the current election, it will be interesting to compare this map with the new map and see if there's much change. All right, so what do you have to be a representative? You don't have to be very old. You only need to be 25 years old. And there are some fairly young representatives, as young as 28, 30 years old. It's unusual, but it happens. The terms only last 2 years, and it's designed that way because it's supposed to mean that these people are almost in perpetual election mode. They're almost perpetually coming back to you looking for your vote, which is supposed to keep them responsive to you. They're supposed to be constantly asking you how you feel about things. It's not exactly how it pans out, but that's what the design of it was. There's no limit to the amount of times these people can be reelected, which is a drawback. Now, these two men that I have pictures of, I think they might be both dead at this point. But as just a couple of years ago, they were the longest serving people in the House of Representatives. And John Dingell had been there for almost 60 years, and Robert Byrd, again, almost 60 years. So I think you can see that there might be a reason that you might want to have some sort of term limits on people. Because honestly, Dingell especially, it was questioned as to whether or not he had Alzheimer's and he was still serving. And you just wonder at the I don't know, the objectivity and the efficiency of someone who is at that point in their life. All right. So the number of representatives is, again, based on population. And like I said, it's determined by the census, which is taken every 10 years. So we will be up for that again in 2020. And the Senate is not like that. Like we talked about before, the Senate, everybody gets 2. And the senators have to be a little bit older. They have to be at least 30 years old. And they have a 6-year term, so they're not quite as responsive and quite as accountable to people. You have to have a long memory to remember if you don't like something that a senator did. So if you have a senator that you're really objecting to, and you really, really highly think like this is just an awful thing this person did, you have to remember it for a long time because he's not going to probably come up for election for a while. And by the time they do come back up for re-election, they're at that point trying to make really, really nice with the constituents. They're trying to really, really come back and do things that they know their voters are going to really, really like because they wouldn't be reelected at that point. So the way it's designed, only 1/3 of them come up for election every 2 years. So things are much calmer in the Senate. And again, it's pretty smart on the framers' part to design it this way so that you have one chamber, the House, which is constantly, almost perpetually in election mode, always coming back to the people. And then the Senate, which is calmer, they can kind of sit back and they can think things over a little bit better and they don't have to be so knee-jerk as far as some of the decisions they make. So it really is a good system as far as the way the election cycle was determined. All right. Article 1 of the Constitution describes the job of Congress, which is to make the laws. Now, you've heard me talk about this before, about how it makes me insane when people who are running for the presidency, or sometimes even occasionally, President Obama didn't really do this, but I have heard others say how they're going to send legislation or they're going to create legislation, and that is not the president's job. He can suggest, he can talk with members of his party that are in Congress and maybe say, hey, this is a direction I'd like to go, but he cannot ever introduce laws. It's not something he's able to do. And these laws have to do with rules of behavior, so like things that are legal and not legal. Taxing, especially, taxing has to come from Congress, and spending of money, creating government programs. So understand that every penny that is spent by your government, it has to come out of the House of Representatives first. The spending bill has to come from there first. So the president can't make it up. He can't start it. It has to come from them first. Congress also has the important job of declaring war. We have not been in a declared war since World War II. Not Vietnam, not over in the Middle East. We have not declared war on anybody. It's ironic because we have been in wars since World War II, but we haven't declared war. The reason being is because you have to have a focus point if you're going to declare war. You have to be able to focus on a specific country or group of countries that has caused your problem, that you have your argument with. And if you don't have that, it's almost fruitless to declare a war. In the case of Vietnam, our problem was that we were actually fighting with China and Russia. And they were actually fighting with us, but we were carrying on the war in Vietnam with each other. And none of us, not Russia or China or us, not any of us, wanted to declare war on any of us, but we were all carrying the war on in Vietnam. So sometimes it's a little complex, and that's the reason that war has not been declared, because you have to have a focus point if you're going to do that. Now, the president can ask for a declaration of war. That doesn't mean he's going to get it. But normally, under normal circumstances, in everything that I have read and studied, if things are that serious and the president goes to Congress and asks for a declaration of war, he's going to get it. Also, if it were a circumstance where Congress wanted to declare war without the president asking, they could do that as well. But I don't think if our country were ever in that kind of situation, I think we would all understand, and the president himself as well, or herself as well, would understand that we need this declaration of war, and we would all be in the same boat, and we would all say, yes, this is what we need, and we would be behind each other. All right, if you're going to get a law passed, look at Bill on the Hill. Maybe I'll play for that for you in class, just to remind you of your elementary school days. You have to have both houses of Congress pass a bill. A bill is the name of a proposed law. So a law can start in either house, the Senate or the House of Representatives. Like if it starts in the House, it has to go to the Senate. If it starts in the Senate, it has to go to the House. And then both of those have to agree. Once they both agree on whatever's in this bill, it goes to the president. The president can choose to sign it, and if he does, it becomes a law. Or if the president decides he doesn't like it, he doesn't have to sign it. And then it's called a veto. If he vetoes it, it's dead. It stops. There's nothing more to be done except Congress, if you look at the last bullet, and this is important, Congress can override the veto, but it takes a higher vote, all right? It takes a 2/3. So it's only 51% of Congress to send the bill to the president, but it takes 2/3 to get an override on that. Now let me tell you how this works in the real world. Congress will hardly ever send a bill to the president that they think he's going to veto, because they don't want to deal with having to try to find an override vote. The only way they will send a bill to him that they think he's going to veto is if they know for a fact they have the votes to override. On the other hand, if you're the president, you're not going to want to veto a bill and then have Congress override you because it makes you look weak. And so on the president's side of that, he's going to think very long and hard about vetoing a bill if he knows that he's going to be overridden in Congress. So I see what's on this frame, and I know what's on paper, but you have to understand the mental thinking behind it on both sides, that there's a lot of chess gaming behind it, that you don't just, well, we want this thing to become a law, so we're sending it to them like it or not. Well, that's fine, except if you don't have the override votes, that's not a smart move, because then it makes you look weak as Congress. And likewise, if you're the president, you can veto that because you don't like the law, but if you know they're going to override it, it makes you look weak as the president, so they don't very often do it that way. All right, I'm going to stop here and pick up with the executive branch on another screencast.